It's nice to see some familiar faces, and we sort of have gone from seeing each other very regularly to what feels like now, a really long time. And look, a lot of what I say will be well known to each and every one of you in your own organisations or businesses. Extraordinarily challenging times for our country, and it's been a really momentous couple of months. Obviously, coming into the new year in January, the government had received some pretty good intel out of China that there was a new flu-like illness that was spreading through Hubei in Wuhan, and a bit like bird flu or SARS. These have been outbreaks that have occurred in the past that have been dealt with, have been reasonably localised. But notwithstanding all that, we were taking the reports very seriously. It escalated extraordinarily quickly once we saw the response of the Chinese authorities, locking down the province, restricting travel, and that led us to what was at the time a really extraordinary decision, and we were, alongside the United States, the first countries in the world to do this, and that was to impose a travel ban on China. Now, that decision on its own was, had massive economic implications, particularly coming into the new academic year with international students. And I'm sure most of you know this stat, but international education is our fourth largest export. After iron ore, coal and gold, fourth is international education. So it was a really momentous decision to say we're banning travel from China. As it turns out, that decision was well and truly vindicated, and really since that time we've been singularly focused on reducing the health impacts on our country. Now, the big concern we had, and to some degree still have, but I think it's been mitigated to a large extent, is the capacity, or ICU capacity, in our states and territories, and particularly in our regions. And what was, again, pretty clear out of the evidence from China, but also in the second round effects that were occurring in Italy, was, unlike the ordinary flu, the number of people that required hospitalisation and indeed required a respirator and an ICU bed could quite quickly completely exhaust our capacity in Australia. So the most momentous decision I think that has been taken in this process was the Prime Minister deciding to establish a national cabinet, and it's not a COAG meeting. It's a cabinet. Each Premier and Chief Minister, and obviously the Prime Minister, is bound by cabinet confidentiality and the ordinary rules of cabinet. And setting that up, I think, meant we were able to take the necessary action early to limit the outbreak. It's pretty clear that most of the cases that have come to Australia arrived here by plane or by boat. We were, to be quite frank, planning on having at least 15,000 active cases by about now. At the moment, we're about 500 active cases. We've peaked at about 7,000 cases in total. So the National Cabinet, putting down pretty hard restrictions, which have had a devastating economic impact, let alone a mental health and other impact, have bought us the time we needed to get our health system ready. Now, we've been able to increase our ICU capacity to 7,500 beds. We've been able to increase respirators by 4,000. And to, for those of you who don't know, the high death rate that's been occurring in other jurisdictions is not solely due to this reason, but one of the significant reasons has been you get to a point where your lungs are basically going to shut down if you don't have a respirator. Now, if you have a respirator, your prognosis is pretty good. If you don't get on a respirator, you're almost, in certain cases, going to guaranteed to die. And in many of those places, they literally just did not have enough respirators. So they were sending people home for a treatable illness, knowing that that was consigning that person to what was a pretty bad death. And we really didn't want to obviously emulate that. So we went down hard on restrictions. It's bought us the time we now need to get our health system ready. And I think we can say now with some level of certainty that with 7,500 ICU beds, of which there are 33 that are 33 active COVID-19 cases that are taking up an ICU bed, that we've got really significant capacity. So the primary focus has been health, but obviously as Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Housing, fairly quickly after the heavy restrictions were put down by the states and territories in conjunction with National Cabinet, it became clearer and clear just the devastation that it was going to wreak on the economy more broadly. And we've brought down 3 packages, and I was sort of saying in the introductory remarks, it feels like we have almost done 3 budgets worth of work in the last 2 months in bringing down those 3 packages. The first was essentially bolstering our social welfare safety net. We knew there was going to be large swathes of people, the minute restrictions were put in place, that through no fault of their own were going to be unable to work, or were going to have their businesses in some cases that had been many decades in building up, that were going to literally cease operating overnight. So we put in place household payments, household assistance payments, a $750 payment, of which there are now 2, but one's been made. Over $5 billion has been paid out to about 6 million households. We also increased the job seeker payment. We effectively doubled it through the coronavirus supplement, which is in total about an $1,100 a fortnight payment for people who lost their jobs. The second tranche was primarily focused on supporting small businesses in the banking system. So through the Australian Office of Financial Management, we injected $40 billion into the financial system to make sure that our banks could continue operating, they could continue lending to small businesses, because in our view now was the risk, or the time, now was the time that there was a significant risk that banks would really constrain their lending, and that would be the worst possible time to do it for small businesses. So $40 billion injected into the banking system. And we also put in place cash flow assistance for small businesses, so up to $100,000 paid through your BAS for small businesses. The first payment up to $50,000 in the last BAS, which was the 28th of April, and another $50,000 in the next BAS, again to try and help businesses stay afloat in this time. Throughout that period, we also became very clear that some form of hibernation strategy for businesses was going to be necessary, because whilst you're unable to trade and there's literally not even $1 of income coming in the door, there are heavy fixed costs that continue, whether that be mortgage repayments, whether that be rent. So in that time, we negotiated with the Australian Bankers Association to suspend the repayment of loans for COVID-affected businesses, and also a slightly more delicate task of trying to bring together landlords and tenants to basically say to landlords, and I have a great deal of sympathy for landlords who themselves have financial obligations, but to say that the pain must be shared, because the last thing we wanted was a whole lot of small businesses that effectively during the COVID period accrued large rent deferrals, which would be quite crippling on the other side of the pandemic. So in that time, we also negotiated through the National Cabinet a framework where the pain would be shared between landlords and tenants. So that was the second tranche of economic response to COVID-19, and then it culminated with the third tranche, which is sort of, I think, taken all of the headlines, and that is the JobKeeper program, $130 billion wage subsidy, which was really the centrepiece of the third and final economic tranche of support, and that's a $1,500 a fortnight wage subsidy. Again, as this progressed and as it became clear that in order to keep businesses going, we'd have to assist them into some form of hibernation, we became quite anxious that what that would mean in many cases was, yes, the business goes into hibernation, but all connection between the employer and the employers is severed, and that could be quite devastating. And, we looked back at the recession of the early 1990s. It took 3 years for our unemployment rate to reach 11%, from where it was at about the 7% mark. So 3 years to go from 7% unemployment to 11, but then it took 7 years to come back from 11% to 7%. So we were really concerned that if that relationship was severed between employers and employees, even when restrictions were lifted, that could have a real long tail of dislocation for businesses and obviously really hurt those individual employees involved. So that was the rationale for the JobKeeper program. We took a uniquely Australian approach. We had the opposition and our helpful friends in the media giving us advice about the UK model. The UK model, wage subsidy model, I must say, is still not making payments because they did something a bit different to us. They decided to create an entirely new system in order to make these payments. What we decided, and the PM made very clear, was you don't really want to be building new systems. You want to use existing systems, existing payment mechanisms to get the support out the door. So we've used the ATO. As I said earlier, in tranche 2 of the economic response, we used the BAS in order to provide cash flow assistance for small businesses. Well, JobKeeper, again, was a uniquely Australian response. We, rather than going down the path of paying 80% of somebody's wages, so if you're an extraordinarily well-paid person, you were getting 80% of your salary, and if you were someone on the minimum wage, you were getting 80% of your salary, we felt that being the egalitarian society that we are, that we should put in place a flat $1,500 payment for everybody. Now, of course, that means there are some anomalies in the system, but again, putting together a $130 billion program in the matter of 10 days, we felt that it was better to keep it simple and get the money out the door. And it's been an absolute lifeline for nearly 900,000 businesses now who have enrolled in JobKeeper, covering some 6.3 million employees. We can find it to full-time employees, part-time employees, and long-term casuals, being people who are employed as a casual by that business for at least 12 months. And we also, through the National Cabinet, agreed that public sector employees would be exempt from the scheme, but they would be the responsibility of the relevant government to come up with some other alternative scheme. So, so in our case, for example, Maroondah City Council, who's been forced, obviously due to restrictions and social distancing requirements, to close down their leisure facilities with large workforces, the National Cabinet agreed that those employees would be the responsibility, in this case, of the Victorian state government, because they are ultimately employees of a level of government that's a creature of the Victorian state government. So that were the parameters. Again, it's been I think, reasonably successful. The question now is, coming out of restrictions, how soon we do that. Now, it's probably fair to say through the National Cabinet process, the Prime Minister's been a little more forward-leaning with that. I think his view, and I happen to share this view, is we've exceeded all of our expectations on the health side of things, and we should actually try to bank some of those gains and in a responsible fashion, obviously consistent with health advice. We should do all we can to get the economy moving as quickly as possible, because As you all know, the longer business is dislocated, the longer that a business is unable to operate, the more likely it is that that business never reappears on the other side. And that's, what everything we've done, whether it was providing cash flow assistance to small businesses, whether it was the JobKeeper program, whether it's support for households. We want as many businesses, as many households and as many people as possible to come through on the other side as unscathed as possible. And we don't want to, figuratively speaking, lose those businesses on the way through, because as I said, it's really quick, a really quick process to lose jobs and to increase unemployment. It's very, very hard to reverse it. So the more jobs you save in the interim, the much easier it is. A bit like the old maxim of small business of, keeping hold of your existing customers and keeping them happy, means there's, less new customers you have to find. So that's really been the approach. In that time, there's been a whole range of other things going on, and you've all seen today the WHO has been asked to conduct a review. We've obviously led the calls for a review into COVID-19. Now, that hasn't pleased our Chinese counterparts, and that's an ongoing relationship that we will need to manage. But our very strong view is, in a globally interconnected world that we're living in now, whilst we're calling this a 1 in 100 year event, this has been compared to the Spanish flu of 1918. This might not be a 1 in 100 year event going forward. These sorts of pandemics, in a world where we're much more connected and there's a massive free flow of people on planes around the world, that we need to do everything we can to get to the bottom of this, because if we don't, we could be faced with something very similar to this, not in 100 years, but in 10 years, or heaven forbid, even sooner than that. So, Kerry, I might leave it there. I could probably keep going, but that's really informed the health and economic response of the government, and I'm happy to take questions or happy to go on with the agenda, however you want to handle it. I think you're still on mute, Kerry.
Edwina, I'm on mute.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can hear me now? Okay, Edwina, I think it'd be good if we could take some questions.
Yeah, we just thought maybe it'd be a good idea, perhaps put them in the chat, and we can, if anyone has a question, or unmute yourself if you just want to ask the question.
Well, I just want to say what a very good job the government's done, considering in comparison other countries and what they've done. Australia's achieved an enormous amount in a very short period of time, implemented a lot of things. The government, as well as I think the Australian population, needs to be applauded for the way they've behaved through this and how disciplined they've been.
Yeah, Gloria, I agree. I think if you look at countries that we would readily compare ourselves to, whether that's the United States or UK or many countries in Western Europe, France and others, our infection rates are a fraction, our mortality rate is a fraction of theirs, and it's not been an accident. I think it's been, again, I think the national cabinet process of the PM and all of the premiers and state chief ministers, essentially putting all politics aside and just getting together and working together has been the catalyst for that. But you're right, Australians have been really sensible. And, I remember before the very heavy restrictions were put in place, people stopped going out. People actually led the government rather than the other way around, and I think that's a great credit to us.
I agree.
Right.
Michael, mine's not really a question, but I'd like to echo Gloria's statement, but also congratulate the government on the JobKeeper program. METEC has virtually had zero income since this began. and that's definitely been a lifeline for us and obviously many, many other businesses. But also, I know that there's a lot of complex information behind it, but I think the actual process for a business is quite simple, and that's been really good. I'd also like to say I've really enjoyed, I guess, the bipartisan style of politics that we've been having for the last few months. I think that's been really welcomed, particularly when people are already stressed, and I think the government's been doing a great job. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Really appreciate the feedback.
Yeah. Any more? No?
Oh, Gail?
This is a purely selfish question, Michael, but is there any way you can give poor tax agents some relief about all these lodgements that we have to do on certain times? We can't get a blanket extension from the ATO, and we're all drowning with constant interaction with our clients about JobKeeper, job stimulus, the whole lot of box and dice, and we're all drowning. And I don't talk that just from my personal perspective, but I know from my other colleagues too that it's all a go, but we can't get a standard exemption or extension out of the tax office. They tell us we've got to treat everything on an individual case. Well, we haven't got time. We're already working 12, 14 hours a day.
Gail, I know, all small businesses are turning to their accountants and tax agents now. Now, we did, I have spoken to the Commissioner about this. I'm speaking to him every morning at the moment, and we did provide some blanket deferrals. You'd probably remind me on what they were.
5th of June, and everything has to be paid on that date. But, just even that is a struggle. Lodge and pay on the same day, the 5th of June. That's nothing more than they do every year.
Yeah, but it was provided in a blanket fashion. But I have also said to the Commissioner that, where tax agents, basically going with a job lot of deferrals because they're completely under the pump, that, that the Commissioner has to exercise his discretion sensibly to provide those. Gail, if you're having any issues, I'm very happy for you to feed it straight through to me. There's always a delicate balancing act here. We don't want to suspend the tax system, but at the same time, there's only so hard we can work all of you tax agents as well. So, I've been working pretty closely with the Institute of Chartered Accountants, CPA Australia, IPA Australia, every blanket deferral request that they've made has been granted. The Commissioner has done it begrudgingly in a couple of cases, but if you think that there's a specific time frame or additional time frame that you need, please let me know.
Well, I don't know what Peter Fry's got to say about this, but I think that there's been some talk about at least the middle of June. I don't know what you think, Peter.
Look, I agree with you. It's a difficult one. I had to, for the practice, make a application on the 15th to get extensions because all our focus was, we probably lost, 6 weeks or so, where the focus was just helping clients with the cash boost, with the JobKeeper, working out the turnovers, doing all the sort of requests. It was just a huge inundation of requests. So all our normal work went away. So we're effectively 6 weeks behind, a good 6 weeks behind. As Gail said, the 5th of June is normal. That's nothing. The Commissioner hasn't given us anything. He's given us the 30th of June for super funds, which is great. Why couldn't he have done that for everything? Because the 30th of June would be okay. I reckon most of us would probably make the 30th of June. Take a hell of a lot of pressure off practice owners as well as staff in terms of just trying to meet that deadline.
Yeah, Peter, look, there are some competing objectives that the Commissioner's trying to manage too, in that they have their normal workforce flex up, which has been slightly modified because, for example, the hotlines that have been operating through JobKeeper have been running at about 200% of normal. So last week, for example, the ATO was averaging calls about 90,000 calls a day, where this time last year it was about 30. They have their ordinary kind of tax time flex up for staff, and when we're talking the ATO, we're talking thousands of people. So, you know, if you provide a blanket deferral, worthy though it is, and I'm not necessarily arguing with you on it, it does have massive implications for workforce management. And the other complicating factor for that has been one of the focuses of the government has been, how do we redeploy the Australian Public Service? So, for example, we've got a couple of thousand people who would ordinarily be there processing visa applications all day, every day, who have literally got nothing to do at the moment. We've redeployed them to Services Australia, and they are also being redeployed to the ATO as well. So the Commissioner has all these sort of competing things to try and juggle. But I'm happy to take your feedback on board and have a chat to the Commissioner tomorrow morning when I have my regular catch up with him, and see, you know, what sort of feedback and what they're doing as far as deferrals go. And you know, they might just be hesitant to provide a blanket deferral, but I don't know if you're hearing, Peter, that they've been quite, you know, have they been quite open to individual deferral requests? I mean, that's the instructions I've given the Commissioner are to be very easygoing with those.
For the 31st of March, which was our first big deadline, I had a handful that we couldn't do because obviously we'd lost time and everything even by that stage. They were very quick to come back and grant that to, I think we got, we were to the end of April, and then we still missed a couple, and so we got to the end of May. So no, granted, they've been very good, and they were very quick on that one to come back. So hopefully they'll be quick coming back with this one and grant it. The old problem of, they want you lodge and pay, or they'll give you a deferral on the return but not the payment. You haven't completed the return, so you don't know what the payment's meant to be if it is a payment. That's a bit hard, but look, I understand there's competing things, but certainly from there's been a lot of jokes going around because of the volume of inquiry and access to the accountants and tax agents that there's not going to be many of us left after all of this, because we'll be all in padded rooms because of the extra hours, and we're taking an enormous amount of emotional and mental pressure from our clients and the community, just trying to help them through it. And then we've got to try and help our staff through it and help ourselves through it. So a lot of our time is just, I'll say, counselling in terms of for the clients, and something we're not trained for, but you've just got to try and help your clients.
I think the other thing about this, and I don't know about you, Peter, a lot of this work that we're doing, at this stage our fee structure hasn't gone down, so none of us are eligible, very few of us would be eligible for JobKeeper for our staff or anything else, because our income hasn't gone down to date. But if we get paid for any of this work from these businesses that are unlikely in a lot of cases to restart, our income will go down, but it won't be in time to get any subsidy from the government because it'll be outside the scope. So, we're doing this work, but if we get paid, it'll be a miracle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Accountants always probably tend to lag maybe 3 months of the economy, because you're still doing what's in the pipeline, you're still sorting things out, and it's not until you get to the point where all that's finished and no one can actually get new work that we tend to find that will be impacted. So as Gal said, and the biggest issue is even what we had done and have put out there, inverted commas, will we get paid for it? That we don't know yet. That's something down the track.
Yeah, no, got you.
We have another question, Michael, and it's just your view of the likelihood and nature of our economic recovery.
Well, look, I think it's going to be largely dependent on how quickly we move out of restrictions, and the National Cabinet has outlined the sort of the 3 stages, and it's really up to each state and territory as to how quickly they move along that track. The difference between a prolonged, recession and something that's a bit shorter, I think, is going to largely depend on whether we can get back to some level of business as usual, by the start of the new financial year. There are going to be inevitably areas of the economy that just take much longer to recover. So I can't see international travel resuming in any serious way, certainly this side of Christmas, if not much longer. And that obviously has huge consequences for tourism. The ongoing or the permanent damage that it does to international education, I think, is yet to be completely understood. And the capacity that you lose. So Gail and Peter refer to businesses that might just not get to the other side, and those sorts of things create massive capacity constraints in the economy, even when the global economy recovers. So that's the grim side. On the upside, I think, because we have been able to get on top of the health issues so quickly, we've got a relatively healthy workforce and a relatively healthy country. We're miles ahead of many of our competitors. And so theoretically speaking, I think we're in a really good position to take advantage of some of the opportunities that are going to come our way. And there will be undoubtedly opportunities in a post-COVID world. And finally, I think there'll be a test for all of us, and that is to what extent do we use this as an opportunity to reshape, not drastically, but just maybe tweak some aspects of our economy to bring back some, essential sovereign capability, and I'm particularly talking about reshaping our supply chain. A lot of businesses, and I've spoken to literally dozens of them, who are entirely reliant on China for their supply chain, have obviously had the shock of their lives, because overnight, all of their components or products stopped arriving, and I think they are feeling that they need to manage that exposure. Now, some of that will include sovereign domestic capability, and others will be retooling or reconfiguring their own supply chains to other countries. So that's a sort of a long-winded way of saying the jury's still out. Whether this ends up being a blip on the radar and we bounce back really quickly, or whether it's a longer-term and sustained downturn, I think depends on how quickly now our states and territories allow us to get back to some safe, COVID-safe business as usual. And, it's obviously getting to a really critical time. Just finally, I'd say we probably didn't think that by, the middle of May we'd be having these conversations, but I think now's the time we bank the chips or bank the credits we've got now, because we were so effective in the health response. And the sooner we can get that going, I think the more likely we are to have a small blip rather than a long-term downturn.
Yeah. Look, Scott's asked whether you think the funeral restrictions will lift in line with cafes.
Yeah, I would have expected so. So, funerals, weddings, I would have thought that they should be aligned. And, I've actually, a good mate of mine from the Blackburn Footy Club is James McLeod from the Tobin brothers, who I know is involved in your peak body.
About them, Michael. Sorry.
Yeah, we shouldn't talk about the competition, but he's fighting the cause collectively, I can assure you, Scott. So, there's actually been really good advocacy from the funeral industry, and I think, when you think about the sort of more devastating aspects of this whole pandemic, the two for me are funerals, obviously, and there's actually been a funeral I've not been able to attend of someone that I would have absolutely have attended, and weddings. And I would have thought that they are about as high up the priority list as anything.
Excellent, thank you.
Michael, a couple of things. For over 20 years now, I have been actually telling clients who are manufacturers to depend less on China and to broaden their supply range, because we have other countries that have the capacity to supply like China, like India and things that have very good, you know, manufacturing and low cost. And, do you know, a lot of people laughed at me and said, why would I do that? Why would I have more suppliers than I need to? And some of them have actually come back to me recently and said, you know what, you've been telling me for years to broaden your supply range, and now it's come back to bite us. So that's just a comment on the business side. The other side, and I'm not going to go into detail into this at the moment, but I wondered if you could give me a contact in CPA Australia, because I've been battling the state government on the vendor disclosure document for small businesses. We've met with the chief of staff for small business and everyone. They just don't seem to understand what the problem is. The form that is a prescribed form is actually wrong, quite simply in every way. And it's very difficult for accountants to prepare it, because where it should be minus, it's got plus and these sort of things. I'm looking for somebody in CPA Australia to take up the cause and to help us get a presentation to the state government so that they actually understand. I've met with them several times, made very simple spreadsheets to show them what the issues are, and it's like straight over the head, such a simple concept, and they just don't understand it. And
Gloria, if you shoot me a note, I can get your contact very easily. So
excellent, thank you.
Yeah, look, I think the only there's a comment from Danielle saying that she's noticed that with people coming out of isolation, that perhaps they're going back to their normal ways of physical distancing. Is it a time that we need to be more careful and aware of a second wave of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that you know, we've got to be, you know, really cognizant of a second wave. I think the evidence thus far is showing that, again, to go back to what I said earlier, that, you know, the community transmission was always pretty low, even when we had, you know, significant number of cases arriving here by plane or boat. But we will have clusters, as we've seen, you know, at Cedar Meats or at McDonald's. Those things, I think, are going to be unavoidable. But we now, thankfully, have the capacity to go in and quite quickly deal with them, whether it's contact tracing, whether it's the COVID Safe app, which, Ed, I have to put in a shameless plug. Please, if you haven't downloaded it, please download it. It just saves, excellent, saves our contact tracers that much work, because rather than literally sitting there on the phone trying to contact people and work through, you know, it's obviously an automated, very quick process. But it's like all these things, there's a risk and a reward, and you know, we've flattened the curve. I think we've got our health system in such a way now that it will be able to cope with those clusters and really stamp down on them pretty quickly and get on top of them. But we don't want to flatten the economy at the same time. So we've just got to walk that fine line. And I think the fact that we've bought ourselves this time, we've now got the ICU capacity, we've now got the much better understanding of the virus and how it operates, that, you know, yes, there will be, until there's a vaccine, there will continue to be new cases, but I think it, you know, all things being equal, will be at a level that means we don't see the sort of Singapore style second wave, which, you know, obviously Danielle's right, we want to avoid that.
Yeah. Kerry, might hand back over to you. Thank you.
Okay.
I have one question.
Oh, Nabil. Yes, go for it.
Put my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Nabil. I missed that.
Just a quick one. Michael, again, well done on what the government's done collectively and unified around all of the scenario. You touched on this earlier around you're saying it's a 1 in 100 year episode, this incident, but that it might happen again. And I just shudder. I mean, from a background in large business, risk management and business continuity planning is part of and parcel of what we do. And working with small to medium-sized businesses, that's not very much on the agenda for most business people, because it's head down, bum up, just get on with the job. So what is the government anticipating? I know that you'd be busy with what's happening now, and rightly so, but are you looking forwards into much further into the future about should something like this happening? Because I would hate to think that every time something sneezes in some corner of the world, that the whole entire thing shuts down. I think that would be unsustainable. And so I'm just opening it up, and maybe it's not an answer that you can give, but I'm just really interested in your thoughts.
Well, Nabil, look, it's a very good point. I think the reality is we will be much better equipped for pandemics into the future because of the experience we've gone through here. The reason why I'm probably pessimistic in thinking these are no longer going to be 1 in 100-year events is just how more connected we are. Now, if you look back at SARS in 2004, SARS was actually more deadly. It probably wasn't as easily transmittable, but it was certainly had a higher mortality rate. But when you think, it's only 15 years ago, we had 1/10 the amount of travel between China and Australia in 2004 as we do now. So it's increased tenfold. Now, I think you could almost basically say that about various parts of the world. We're so much more connected. These sorts of viruses and illnesses have popped up around the world probably throughout millennia, but have been contained to very small populations in particular regions. Now, I think the reality is we are just, the movement of people is so great that, even Ebola, if you look at Ebola in West Africa, Ebola had a horrific mortality rate. And it was essentially contained to West Africa. Part of the reason being there wasn't huge amounts of movement of people from West Africa to the rest of the world. But even that's changing, and I look at Australian businesses doing business in Africa now. So the positive you can take out of it, Nabil, is we have learnt so much out of this. Our health systems, our readiness. We put in place a pandemic plan during the Howard years, actually, and I think it was when Abbott was health minister, we put in place a pandemic plan, which again I think has probably prepared us reasonably well compared to many countries. If someone had have said to me that in the middle of this pandemic, Australia would have more PPE, would have more tests, would have better ICU capacity than even the UK, the US, Western Europe, even I maybe wouldn't have believed it, but we have been able to do that because we started a bit in front of Bill. I think this is going to help us remain in front, but I think the incidence of these sorts of things happening are going to be much greater. And finally, it's a very long-winded answer, but I've got lots of Chinese friends, whether they're from Hong Kong or Chinese Malays or whoever, and I've never really understood why they would sometimes get around with a mask on. I always thought it was a bit strange. I don't think anyone thinks it's strange anymore. And why? Well, it's because they've lived through it. They lived through SARS. They lived through bird flu. So their populations were so much more equipped in some respect to deal with it because to them, pandemics are not 1 in 100-year events. They're much more regular. And sadly, I think it's not controversial to say that we're all going to end up with the same sorts of view as they do.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael, for being so generous with your time. And as always, you are inspiring. We are very grateful for the advice you've given us today, and we would love it if you'd join us again soon so we can continue to receive the latest information and support our businesses. We also wish you and your government all the best as you navigate a very tricky balance between safety and the community and the economy. I think we can all agree that we are really lucky to be Australians, and our leadership across federal, state, local has been exceptional. Please pass this on to your colleagues, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Kerry. Thanks everyone for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, have you got just 1 second, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, sure.
I did send an email through to you, and it's in the example on the JobKeeper of an anomaly in the mechanism for JobKeeper eligibility, etc. It's where you've got one taxpayer but with 2 sites, and you have to have 2 different ABNs.
Pete, why don't we take it offline? So you've emailed me. I'm in town at the moment, but I'll catch up with it and I'll give you a call.
Yeah, look, it's probably in amongst those millions of emails you've got, so I wasn't.
No, we'll track it down.
Yeah. Happy to do that.
Okay, thanks, mate.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Kerry. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye. Okay.
Oh,
Well, that was great.
that was great.
That was awesome. Absolutely. I'd really like now to welcome Chris Zedak from Biz Maroondah. Chris will now give us an update from our local perspective, what's available, what we need to know, and how they can support us. It would be really good to know, Chris, if there is anything we can do to support you or the community more broadly. Again, if you have any questions of Chris, please put them into the chat and we will answer them at the end. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Kerry. Hello, everyone. Essentially, when it comes to forums such as these, it offers us a fantastic insight into the business community. Prior to this meeting, we had our Maroondah Business Advisory Committee meeting, and the members at that committee are a fantastic conduit into the business community. Before we can assist in any great measure, we need to understand exactly what the issues are and how they affect businesses. We've been able to do that to great effect through a number of mechanisms that we've employed. One of those being a regional-based survey, the others being very much hard work implemented by the Business and Activity Centre development team, where the team has got on the blower and spoken personally to hundreds of businesses in terms of understanding the issues that are directly affecting them. And I would see not only the business, pardon me, the Maroondah Business Advisory Committee, but certainly the Maroondah Business Group as being a wonderful conduit into the broader business community. So I would look to each of you to provide your insights, your learnings, and have them come back to us so that we could take that information on board and understand exactly how it is that we can tailor not only the services that we offer to local businesses, but also interface and engage with colleagues in state government in particular, who are now very much looking at local government as an invaluable source of information and influence in terms of what it is they're delivering to local businesses. So, Kerry, at the risk of not wanting to bludgeon the participants here this afternoon with the host of initiatives that we're implementing, and I'm through Sam, what we'll do is we'll send you all of the initiatives that you might circulate that to the members. But certainly the main thing around all of this that would assist us is that ongoing interface and engagement with local businesses. You know, when we first started our interface with businesses 6-7 weeks ago at the height of all of this, it was nothing but panic, tears, people terribly upset and distraught. In that time, and now we've seen a significant change. You look at the number of shops that have reopened at Eastland, they're at nearly 70%. You know, a month or two ago, they were at 25%. So the sentiment out there in the community is certainly improving. I would say that the likes of Peter, Gail, other financial advisors and tax specialists, David Anderson, etc., are really bearing the brunt and the lion's share of the work that's being undertaken in terms of representing the interests and assisting local businesses. So I'd say to you all, you're doing an absolutely fantastic job, and that shouldn't be underestimated. It's a pivotal role that you play in terms of helping our local businesses. So I'd say to you, any and all information that you'd be happy to share with us and flick to us, any new initiatives that you think council or state government or even federal government for that matter need to be looking at in terms of implementing, would be very, very welcomed and well received. I'm just looking here at one of the comments. Love to have a chat when we're available. Absolutely. Would like nothing more than to chat with our local businesses, Steve.
Chris, to say from somebody who's, my fiance is the store manager at Joe Mercer in Eastland. So, you know, anybody who needs shoes, go and see her. It won't make a scrap of difference if you mention my name. But it's also booming. Like the fact that the number of people, the businesses are reopening in Eastland, she has been absolutely run off her feet. It seems like the virus has made everybody have a really good look at their shoe collection and realise that they all need brand new shoes. But it's been completely packed, especially Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So, yeah.
It's a really interesting observation that you make, Steve. We have a number of businesses, or businesses that I've spoken with, are optimistic, very optimistic about the future, and it's amazing how quickly that has changed. And I think at the beginning of this conversation, it was all about, well, we need some financial assistance to keep us afloat. Once businesses were aware that that was coming through, and yes, you know, government has declared prepared policy on the run, and in these sorts of crises, I think, you know, a lot of really good work has been done in terms of ensuring, you know, business continuity and providing or allaying a lot of the concerns. Now that businesses can see that there's hope, now they're having to look at their business model. Now they're having to look at how is it that we plan for, and I think Michael spoke to this eloquently, how is it that we're in a position where we can respond to this and other similar events into the future? And this is where I think people will have to pivot, look hard at their business, and see how it is that they future-proof their business moving forward.
I think Samantha wants to say something.
Oh, I was just going to come off the back of Chris saying that we'll send something through to Kerry and for distribution to members, to your members, which we will do. But in the meantime, if you've got people that are coming to you looking for some support or anything like that, you can direct them through to our Facebook page as well as our website, because Dan in particular is loading lots and lots of content on the Facebook page with various links to, you know, government sites and lots of information. So in the interim, if you're getting any queries, you could certainly direct them there, and then we'll get something through to you as well.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think time's moved on quicker than what we thought it was going to again. That hour really goes quickly. I'd really like to thank Chris. We know you and your team have been working really hard to understand and support them. Really hard to understand all the supports that are available to us. And apparently there are a lot of supports which I know I've tapped into. Your time, you're so generous with your time in listening and supporting individuals and collective in needed businesses. We are fortunate enough to have a proactive local government committed to serving all the needs of business and enabling our community to thrive. Please pass on our thanks to you and your team. You're doing a great job.
Thanks, Kerry. I really appreciate that.
I'd like to thank everyone today for joining us. I'd like to thank Michael, Chris, and how fortunate we are to have access to such a support, information and advice. We certainly don't take it for granted. We really don't. We are looking forward We are looking for inspiring and kind local business stories. Imagine the Four Pillars Gin Distillery in Hillsville. Some of you would have seen the story of this local gin maker in Hillsville who has turned to making hand sanitizer, a much needed commodity in this new age of cleaning down all surfaces we touch. In Maroondah, we have our own heroes. Eastland are distributing over 2,000 bottles of hand sanitizer to our local schools. Next week, as anxious parents and staff and students come back to the norm, Jodie Murphy, Eastland's marketing manager, has been working with our principals and schools and will receive a delivery later in the week. If you know of any other Be Kind stories, as Maroondah has its own Be Kind campaign, that we'd love you to get behind and sort. It has 3 messages: be kind to self, be kind to others, and be kind to business. We will put the details to where to submit these stories in the chat, but also on our website. Maybe you could be kind to business by inviting one of ours to join our growing network. We'd love to see our group grow, as you know, that together we can achieve a lot more. And I want to thank everybody.
Well done.
Okay. Love to everyone.
Thank
See
you
you
all.
in the
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Jenny. So, Jenny, I've tried making contact and had no responses.
We've found a way around it, Peter, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.